What's going on, people, and welcome to another top 10. Thank you for everyone that voted in the poll from last week for this week's video, and the one that won was top 10 all-time Holland players or Netherlands. So without further ado, let's get into it. At number 10 we've got Overmars, a guy that was involved in the 98 World Cup squad that reached all the way to the semi-finals, eventually being knocked out by the runners-up Brazil. But had a fantastic tournament that, in terms of just the country itself and reaching the semi-finals, and Overmars was a part of that. Offered them the creativity on the wing. He had pace, he could score goals, and obviously with Arsenal over the years as well, people came to see what he could do. So for me, he has to make the list. Could cut in if he needed to, but would just stay out wide and could still score goals out wide. And yeah, always rated him, and that is Overmars, number 10. Number 9, Ruud van Nistelrooy. Obviously one of my all-time favourite Manchester United players, one of our best ever strikers for me, easily, at club level. And for Holland, he had his spells. He probably didn't as much as people would have hoped over the years when he was involved with his national team. But he was involved at times and did okay at times, but probably was expected to do a bit more at international level. But I still feel like he did enough to make this list, and I still think he's ahead of a lot of players in terms of just how good he could be when he was on it and focused and up for it. He was obsessed with scoring goals, as we came to learn at Manchester United. And for Holland, he did have his moments. So for me, great striker. I miss watching him. Van Nistelrooy, number 9. Number 8, Patrick Kluivert. Old school striker. I remember watching him growing up at Barcelona, also obviously at Ajax before that, which was a little bit before my time, but I remember him for Holland. And then obviously he came to Newcastle near the end of his career, which didn't really pan out how people would have hoped. But I remember him from Barcelona more than anything with that Rivaldo partnership. And for Holland, I think he did just as well at times. So for me, one that I grew up watching, highly rated, and I think a little bit underrated at times. So Patrick Kluivert, goal scorer, physical, was quick for his size, strong, could score headers, the lot. So Patrick Kluivert, number 8. Number 7, we've got Edwin van der Sar. Just, you can't say enough good things about this guy. The calmness in between the sticks, the winning mentality, the leadership. He did it at Manchester United also. Just a fantastic goalkeeper. Like I said, calmness personified. He was great with knowing where he needed to be for covering his angles and positioning, and he could play it out with his feet as well for such a guy of his stature in terms of his height and how he was built. You wouldn't necessarily think that he could be that technical with the ball at his feet, but he was. And he was a great shot stopper as well. So Edwin van der Sar, a long relationship with his national side as well. So a legend in the game, van der Sar. Number 7. Number 6, Edgar Davids. I loved Edgar Davids, even at Juventus. I remember watching him, but watching him for Holland as well. Just, I think he's a very underrated player. Obviously, he had that crazy spell where he went to Barnet and everything near the end of his career. But I think a very underrated player in his time. He was a pit bull. I think that was his name, if I remember correctly. He was tenacious, but he was technically sound, very good, very well thought of even at an early age, coming through Ajax. A fantastic footballer. As I said, he could be tenacious, but he had the ability on the ball as well. He could score the odd goal. He come to Tottenham as well. Was very excited when he did that at the time. And we all remember him for he had that vision impairment that he had, but we remember him for them glasses, if you will. So looked the part, played the part, and I think he's a very underrated player in footballing history. So Edgar Davids, number 6. Number 5, Clarence Seedorf. In terms of club football with AC Milan and Ajax, I think he's won like 4 or 5 Champions Leagues with different clubs. I think he's one of the only players to ever do that. And he's won countless league titles with clubs he's been at. And for Holland as well, he's been a servant, a bit like Van der Sar was, and played into his later years with them. And such a baller, so clever. When he lost a bit of his pace, he didn't really become a worse player in terms of only from being a little bit slower, but he became an even better footballer in terms of the quick mindset and the quick thinking of knowing what you're going to do before you even get the ball. And technically, he's one of the best players I've ever seen. And I think he's very underrated in that sense and doesn't always get spoken about. So, great player, achieved a lot. Clarence Seedorf, number 5. Number 4, I've gone with Wesley Scheveninger. I was a massive fan of Sneijder at Inter Milan, at Real Madrid, obviously coming through that Ajax system as well. But for Holland, I remember him in certain World Cups and stuff that he was a baller. I'd have loved to have seen him in the Premier League. Just a fantastic baller, technically very good, could take free kicks, corners if you needed him to. He could play through balls and get a lot of assists. He was just that low centre of gravity type player as well, but in the midfield position. He was a quality player, one of my favourites, and I miss watching him. Wesley Scheveninger, number 4. Number 3, I've gone with Jaap Stam. A legend, an intimidating opponent if you're going to face up against him as a striker. Physical, technically underrated when he was on the ball. Clever in his positioning, hardly ever got beat. Tough, just rugged, could score headers. And I think he's just very well-rounded as a player. Even though he was a defender, he could do things on the ball, get up the pitch if you needed him to. Very underrated player. I loved his time at United as well also. And Ferguson even admitted that when he sold him, it was one of the mistakes that he let him go too soon. So, Jaap Stam, number 3. Number 2, I've gone with Dennis Bergkamp. Easily could have been number 1 on this list, but you'll see my number 1 in a minute. That goal against Argentina in 1998 in the World Cup, I mentioned that on a previous video, that the technique and the calmness, the ability to be calm in that situation and as clinical and as deadly as you want someone in that position, he was your man. And the goal he scored against Newcastle for Arsenal, and just the technique he had throughout his career. I think he's so underrated in terms of legend status because of what he could do with his technique and on the ball. Hey. Sorry about that, my dog just is sad. In terms of what he could do on the ball, one of the best players ever in terms of technique. And he could score headers, he could be nasty as well. Legend at Arsenal. Come through that Ajax system as well and won stuff before he even got to Arsenal. Unfortunately, didn't win anything on the national scene in terms of a World Cup or European Championship, but got to the semi-finals in the 1998 World Cup. Unfortunately, they got knocked out by Brazil, but he was a fantastic player. And if you haven't seen him, please go see some of his highlights just on his control, his first touch, his reading of the game. The cleverness of the guy was unbelievable. Dennis Bergkamp, number 2. And then at number 1, Arjen Robben. The guy was just... I remember his early days at Chelsea, you wouldn't have known that he was going to go on to do what he did. Only recently retired, and then I saw him doing like triathlons and things like that. A crazy footballer, very one-footed, but he was one of them players that you knew what he was going to do, but you still couldn't stop it. And I just remember and loved him cutting in, because you knew when he cut in on his left foot from that right-hand side that it would end up in a goal. And he got better and better at it as his career went on. At Bayern Munich, for 2 or 3 seasons, he was unstoppable. And I loved watching him at Bayern Munich. Him on one side, Ribery on the other. But Robben was the guy. But as I said, at them early days at Chelsea, I wouldn't have predicted and known and said that he would have gone on to do what he did. He became a goal scorer, not just a quick-footed winger, playing a central position if you needed him to. And in the 2010 World Cup, he reached the final with his country, Holland. And in the semi-final of the 2010 World Cup, he scored the 3rd goal in a 3-2 win against Uruguay to get to the final. Unfortunately, they lost to Spain, like I said, but he was a vital part in that World Cup, them reaching so far. And I just remember him in other tournaments as well on the international scene where he affected games and was a vital part in them progressing and getting goals at vital times. And as I said, his club career was fantastic in terms of progression. He went from Chelsea, he went to Real Madrid, he started improving, went to Bayern Munich, he was even better. The goals were unbelievable, and just like I said, you knew what he was going to do a lot of the time and you still couldn't stop it. And that's so frustrating as an opponent, but it shows how good he was, because he didn't even really have a right foot, but he didn't need it because he was so world class with his left foot that it didn't matter that he was so one-footed. And he's one of my favourite ever players that I remember watching. In terms of progression as well, I don't think there's many that have progressed and become as good as they ended up being than when you first saw him. I never would have said that he would have ended up as good as he got. And like I said, only recently retired, and now he's doing marathons and everything. So still keeping himself in shape. Retired at Groningen where he first started his career, and a fantastic player. And even though he didn't win anything with Holland, I think his importance and influence in terms of that 2010 World Cup reaching the final, they wouldn't have without him. So for me, it's an easy one. As I said, him and Bergkamp's, it's up for debate who's number 1. For me, Robben nicks it in terms of his importance and influence that he had in his time with Holland. So for me, Arjen Robben #1. That is my all-time top 10 Holland players, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know yours in the comments. And before I go, the new target is 2,000 subscribers by the 1st of December. We will get there. But come and support. Make sure you're subscribed and the notifications are switched on. And I'll see you soon.